Hello, welcome to Art Show. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Darla Jackson. Hi, Darla. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Craig?
Great. I'm excited to talk to you today. I had fun selecting some works from your website. These are in no particular order, but I just wanted to, grab a couple of images for people to get an idea of kind of the work that you do. And so I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about some of these pieces. This one in particular was very, very striking.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. This actually came about from there's an organization in Philadelphia called Jinx, and they actually sell vintage furniture, but they do a heart show every year. And so I had wanted to participate and thought about what could I do. And at this moment, I just had become really interested in texture, and then also all of my work I consider to be this emotional portraiture. And this was years ago, and I was just in a sort of a complicated relationship at the time, and so I wanted to experiment with texture while also talking about the complications of emotional entanglements and what that is like
I
or
love it
can
when
be
an
like.
artist tells me one little thing and it completely changes my understanding of a work of art. And that did it. So that's great to see that. I'm curious. So this is made by a mold,
So I sculpt everything first in clay, and
right?
then I make a rubber mold, a silicone rubber mold, and then I'll cast it in plaster, and then finish it. This is a graphite and black gesso finish that I do.
Okay. So my curiosity is this one done in the same process?
Yes, so this
Okay.
was sculpted in clay, silicone mold, and then cast as a multiple.
So
Um,
that was my next question. Talking about multiples, do you
mhm.
always make multiples of your work?
I used to, because I was terrified of making a piece in clay and then firing it and having it blow up, because that happened to me a few times.
Right. Yeah.
And so I couldn't be trusted, I felt like, with that process. And so I learned mold making. I love the process of mold making. And then it allowed my work to be more affordable. I'm interested in people being able to collect work that are people like me. And so I think that that's something that became really important to me throughout that process.
So when you make multiples of them, do you for better or worse, I'll call it an addition.
Mhm.
What is your addition size usually?
So it depends. The last piece, the snake heart, I left that as an open edition, and I've probably cast 200 of those at this point. Whereas this piece that's on the screen now, this is a limited edition of 3 pieces, and so I'll
Okay.
usually have an artist proof, and then 3 to 10 pieces is the maximum. Usually after 10, I start to get bored. So even after 3, I really start to get bored. So,
Right, exactly. And they're the painting, the patina is it's the same on all of them in
yeah,
these.
so this one is acrylic paint. So the graphite that was on the last piece, that's sort of my standard finish. But my partner, Paul Romano, he's a painter. And so when we started dating, after the complicated snake heart relationship, we were able to collaborate. And that sort of opened up a new world for me in terms of my finishes.
Interesting. Do you keep all of your molds?
I have a lot of them. I actually just said, I'm really going to get rid of some. Usually it's the big ones that I get rid of, and the small ones I tend to keep. But I am actually looking to make some room. So I'm going to go through and make a final casting of certain pieces, and then I will keep some, like this one. I really do like this piece. And
This piece
so
is great. And I love how on your website you have four different versions of them.
mhm.
So they with different, are they all painted or are they patinaed?
They're all painted, so they're actually cast in a polyurethane resin. So while it's not terribly comfortable, it is wearable. And I do eventually want to cast one of these in metal. However, casting this in bronze, it would be like a weight on your hands. It would not be
But isn't
comfortable.
that what brass knuckles are for? I mean,
Yes, it would be
right,
like it would be more painful to the wearer, I think,
right.
almost. I mean, both parties involved.
Well, fashion hurts. So
Yes.
I love this piece. I mean, I think it really works on multiple levels. So that's why I really liked it. And then this is a much larger piece,
Yes.
but you can easily work larger and smaller, which is what I like about your work. How did this piece come about?
So this piece I was asked to do an exhibition out in front of University of the Arts here in Philadelphia. And they have these sort of two areas to either side of their columns of their front entrance. And so I wanted something that was stark and stood out against that area. And I also wanted something that I could do and use that idea of the multiple. So this is actually one deer that I sculpted and then cast twice. And so I wanted them looking at each other, but with this giant gap. And again, you know, my work is this emotional portraiture. And so the title of the piece is Null and Void. And so it's referencing, you know, I had a divorce prior to doing this. And so it was just me sort of thinking about, again, that emotional interaction, but the space that gets created between two people as part of this process. And so ironically, with this piece, what happened is I installed it. A week later, they started setting up for the Pope to come to Philadelphia. So the front of University of the Arts was lined with a number of porta potties, and then the kids were secretly riding the pieces behind them. It was,
Yeah.
you know, it was a really dramatic turn of events for these pieces.
So where does this sit now?
Well, it is labeled in my files as destroyed because
Okay.
the art school students riding them did destroy the pieces, and I did not save the molds just because it was a larger piece.
Yeah,
And I have that artist thing where I'm like, well, if somebody wants me to make this, I'll make it
you
again and
could.
better.
Right. Yeah. Well, the photograph is great. And,
Thank you.
you know, actually kind of in a weird way, it kind of goes along with the storyline, I think, that the fact that
Mhm.
they destroyed. So that works out really well. So I love the fact that you talk about emotion
Mhm.
so much in your works, and you know the anthropomorphic ideas emulating those emotions. It really works well. And I'm curious. So this was a question I had for later, but I want to ask it now.
Okay.
Uh, is there a specific uh, uh, type of emotion that you're trying to get your audiences to confront? Because it's not all emotions, right? It's not like anger or anything like that, but there's some of them are very sorrowful, some of
Mhm.
them are very sort of joyful. Is there a like a theme to the emotions that I could?
Not particularly. It's interesting because I feel like I'm always one of those people who's just sort of dove headfirst into art and was like, I'm going to make what I'm going to make. And if people like it, they like it. And if they don't, they don't. And so making this, you know, sort of strange stuff and having people come up and say, I felt exactly like that. I'm like, well, what exactly do you mean? Like, are we feeling the same? Are you interpreting it
Uh-huh.
correctly? Are you getting your own idea out of it? So for me, it depends on the piece. Sometimes it's, you know, sorrowful, sometimes it's joyful. I did actually just do a series that's part of a show that I did with Paul, where it's a loose reference of the stages of grief because we did
Mhm.
just have a large loss in our life. And I did a piece about anger, and where I saw that as a really angry piece, somebody else was like, this is just so calm and beautiful. And I was like, okay.
Right.
You know, it's
Well, I do.
interesting.
I too enjoy the idea that you never really know what your audiences are gonna do
Right.
with your work, and that's kind of a joyful thing in itself. It's fun to
Mhm.
see that. I think I've got this is one last one. So this is a smaller piece. What I also enjoy about your work is the sense of scale. So a lot of your pieces, the ones I've come across, are always very intimate, very sort of
Mhm.
small, like smaller conversations between the two. Is
Mhm.
there a story behind this particular piece?
So this piece I did while it was still sort of during the tail end of, you know, what is the considered the main part of the pandemic. I had just done two shows with this gallery in Portland, Oregon, Antler Gallery, and this was actually shown at their sister gallery, Talon. And I had done a larger series, and then the very first show I did with them was a smaller series. And so I wanted to do this series of animals that was sort of divided as we were sort of going back to real life, but things weren't quite there yet. And so it's all these bisected animals or animals with two heads or four heads. And it's just about this sort of, you're trying to come back to some semblance of normalcy, but it's like, it's so completely not. And then trying to put this face on and say, oh, here I am, I'm back, I'm good. This view you can see is a Japanese no mask, and then the other one has a little sort of wolf head on it. And so just these different aspects of our personality. What do people see?
Right.
Who even are we anymore?
You really are toying with emotions here. And I like the fact that this just came at the end of the pandemic when we were all taking masks off anyway. So
Yes.
that really that works for me. So I want to talk about, let's start at the beginning. When you first were exposed to art, do you have like one of those lightning moments where you had something that you were exposed to as a kid that just shifted your desire for art? Did you have an aha moment?
Yeah, as a kid, I don't think so. My parents were always like sketching and doodling.
Hmm.
My dad had these salt sculptures that he got from when he was in the Navy in Italy, and they were in the cabinets, and I was always obsessed with them. But I never thought of that as like, oh yeah, this is a thing. I'm gonna grow up and make salt sculptures. But I always was drawing and always felt like I was an artist. But because I was practical, I was like, well, I'll have to go to school to, do graphic design or something that'll be a real job. And realized very quickly that I did not have the patience for that. I wasn't particularly good at that. And I did not want to sit behind a computer all day. And so I shifted that and was like, oh, well, I'll make furniture. Also, do not have the patience for that. No good at that. But I like process. I like tools. And so really it was when I was in school and I started doing, I started working with, clay a little bit, and then went to Italy as part of a school trip. And holy moly, that is what like sealed the deal for me.
Was it? Okay.
And yeah, I saw Bernini sculptures and
Okay.
came, cried, came
Okay.
home
All
and
right.
made a life-size figure out of clay, did the whole waste mold process. So it wasn't a multiple, but it was a one of a kind plaster cast piece that still exists in the offices of Moore College of Art to this day.
Okay.
And yeah,
Can you
that
credit
for me, it was like, I want to make sculpture.
sculpture? Can you credit anybody in particular with teaching you the process of mold making or?
Yeah, there's it was kind of a perfect storm of a few different people. So I feel like there's a local artist, actually, Elizabeth Nichols, who was doing this huge project. And when I went in and saw like the scope of what she was doing, I think it made me realize like, oh, I could do this stuff on this scale. She was making large clays, casting them, making molds and casting them in bronze. So that was a good point of interest for me. And then my ex-husband, he had worked at the school where I was going, and I learned a lot of process from him. And then immediately after school, I got a job at a scenic shop here in Philadelphia. And Steve Benazowitz, my boss, we learned tons of different mold making and casting techniques. And so using silicone rubber and fiberglass mother molds and things like that. And then just since then, just the process of doing them and failing miserably, doing them more.
Well, that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
So
I think, oh, go ahead.
it sounds like you're the type of artist that like you want to know how something to do something, so you just go out and find out how to do it, and then you
Yes.
start doing. Yeah, it's very didactic kind of a. I'm just going to plow forward kind of
Yes.
thing. So I'm curious about the content of your works, in terms of the animals that you use and the what you're sort of dipping into. Where do you get your ideas from? What sparks your creativity?
So it used to be that it still kind of is like this, but like one or the other. I'll either see an image in my head, like, oh, I have to sculpt that. What does it mean? I don't know. I just have to, I have to
Okay,
figure it
all
out
right.
while I'm doing it. Or the opposite of that would be like, well, I want to talk about this specific emotion. So I would like tirelessly like look up in symbolism dictionaries. Well, what animals symbolize this? And
Mm.
what poses can I find on the internet that then also feel like what I'm trying to say? And so it became this very like labor intensive process versus that like lightning strike of me just, trusting what I wanted to do. And the more I got into the process, the more I started just to trust that. And so I'll, do a few sketches. Like
Do you keep a
not that I'm
sketchbook?
not a planner, because I very much am. I'm constantly like reading and looking at
Right.
different images, and people send me pictures of dead birds they find on the street, which is wonderful for me and weird for others. But it is something that I just started to trust myself more, and I feel like I guess I know what things will work in terms of the story I'm trying to tell,
Do
depending on
you
the
do,
piece.
do you keep a sketchbook?
I do.
Yeah, all the time. Do you ever make work based on dreams?
Every once in a while,
It's an
not.
odd question, I know, but your work has a dreamlike quality.
I
So
love that.
yeah.
Yeah, I every once in a while have dreams. I guess I don't dream in the visual of what I'm looking for, because I see the animals as humans. They're stand-ins for humans. So I'm trying to talk about human emotion by using these animals. I actually did a show a long time ago at the Center for Emerging Visual Artists. It was an installation of a birthday party, and it was all these animals around with little party hats
I
on. And
remember that. Yeah.
yeah. And so there's a mother deer that's dead on the floor. And I was thinking about this at some point. Like, I'm like, I could never have done this as like a figurative composition. People would be like, what is wrong with you? But as animals, you have this different reaction. Like, people are they feel sorry
It's a
for
lot
it.
of leeway. All right.
Yeah. So
Huh. I'm curious to know, so you've been making work for years now. Uh, Have you noticed has the work changed over time, even in terms of the process? Have you seen a change in your work?
yeah, I think so. I think some of the things that I'm interested in now more so is texture. Like, the further I get into it, the more I want to deep dive into texture. Um Setting up a sculpture is relatively the same even now that I'm firing certain things. Like, I still almost always start with a solid lump of clay. If it's something really big, I will use an armature. But if it's smaller, I just don't bother, just because I can find them more intrusive than not, depending on what it is that I'm doing. And so, yeah, the basis of the process has been relatively similar, but there's certain things that I'm just trying to focus on more and fine tune. Um,
In terms of technical aspects?
yeah.
Because I was curious about the narrative of your work. And,
Mhm.
has it seems it paramount in your work. The
Mhm.
idea that you have a story within your work that you are either trying to get out of you or you're trying to get people to absorb.
Mhm.
Has that narrative always been there in all your works?
I think so. One of I guess I know the moment that it happened. Well, there's a sort of two moments. One, when I was still in school, I made this welded bird and I stuck it in the hallway and just like stood back and watched. And I had all of these people projecting all kinds of stuff onto this hunk of metal that was shaped like a bird. And so while I didn't have any narrative, there immediately became one, just because it's a bird, it's inside. Oh my God. And um that was interesting for me. So that was, immediately like, okay, people are going to project a story onto an animal. And then the second piece that did that was a rabbit with a crow mask. So not the couple that you saw that you projected earlier, but the very first one I did in 2005. And so I saw that as kind of a self-portrait. It's this rabbit, it's wearing a crow mask, and
Mm-hmm.
the title is "What Are You Afraid of?" And I meant it to be, are you afraid of it? Because it's wearing the scary mask, or is it afraid of you? So it's hiding. And the duality that came from that piece, like the people talking about it, how they interpreted it, how even I looked at it, it made me realize how important that ambiguity and the ability for duality in a piece, how important that was to me. And
Mm.
so that was something I've tried to maintain. I guess I try not to think too hard about it because I can get in my own head and talk myself in and out of things pretty easily. But
Like a good
I,
artist would.
yeah, so hashtag
Well,
artist.
it's interesting you mentioned that it was like a sort of a self-portrait.
Mhm.
I'm curious to know about when you step back and look at your work as a whole, would you consider it, how much of it is autobiographical?
Like, to some degree, a lot of it is, because there's always a piece of myself and my story in there. I generally am not talking about things that I don't, if I don't understand at all. And so I always want to have some relation to it. However, sometimes what I'll do is, rather than it be something super specific, I'll try to make it more universal. So I'm not like, this is, like the piece Null and Void. It was talking about me going through a divorce, but I'm not the only person who's gone through a divorce. And so leaving it specific to me, but open-ended enough, and I don't like, in artist statements, I don't like to say, well, this is exactly what it's about, because I think that's limiting.
Yeah, very much
So,
so. Well, that's what I liked about your work, is it does have an openness to it, and
mhm.
people can bring lots of things to it, and it swirls them around and allows them the opportunity to really absorb the work. I really enjoy that. I want to know how often are you in your studio?
Nearly every day, and so I
Every
teach three
day.
days a week. Yeah,
All
so
right.
it's I like to get my coffee and I come up here and I sit at my desk, and it's my studio's in my house, so it's very easy.
Yeah.
And it's really nice because the way the setup is my studio's here, and then we have a library in between Paul and I, and he has a fabulous collection of art books, and then his studio is just over there. And so it's this really nice sort of throughway of creativity. But I get my coffee and I come and I do my little New York Times mini crossword puzzle, and I sit here and
That
I
was my
think,
next question. Do you have rituals? So you
yes.
have to have your coffee. You start out with a puzzle.
Yes, I like to do the New York Times mini crossword. I read that, like, intro email they send out, and now I do tiles, which is their
Right.
little
Yeah.
Archie game. And then there's usually a cat up here, enjoying my coffee with me. And then I just, turn around and I start to get to whatever it is for the day.
Do you
Paul and
work
I
to
just
music?
I do sometimes I'll do podcasts. So it
Okay.
depends on how, like, spastic I'm feeling that day. So if I
Yeah.
feel like I need like a good calm vibe, I'll put some music on. But if I'm a little more, if I want to learn something, I'll put on a podcast.
I'm always in awe of sculptors, and I joke with my painter friends that we all have the same problem. We would all love to be sculptors, but we don't have the space. Like, I don't know how you do it. Like, where do you put everything? Do you have an offsite storage?
So it's interesting because I'm one of those people, I feel like I could make sculpture anywhere. Like, if you can find me to like a 4 foot by 4 foot box, I'll be like, all right, cool. Well, I just need a board and some clay and I'll make it
Right.
work. Um, so I have this room, which is, I think, just an average size room. I have a cabinet full of my molds, and then we have a garage outside, which is primarily storage right now. It has some of my bigger mold pieces, and then I do have a welder and a forge, but they're not hooked up at the moment. Eventually we'll get that together. But yeah, I'm able, the way that I do it, I don't need a lot. Because the mold making and casting process, you need the clay and your board to work on, and then you just need to get your mold rubber and your plaster. And so that's the biggest problem, is like the heavy bags and then the storage of the molds and the
But
hoarding of them.
you have a garage.
I do have a garage, but I don't work out there because it's
Right.
got
Right.
a
That's
leaky
but it's
roof.
for storage. It's not there's not a car in the garage though, right?
No, it's
Right.
there's an 8 foot long lioness sculpture in the garage that is about as big as a car.
Okay. And then to compound things, to make it worse, you have two artists together. So you must be
Yeah,
jammed to the hilt.
we are.
Are there other artists that you tend to look at for pleasure or inspiration, or do you have some go-to artists that you never get tired of looking at?
Yeah, there is Instagram makes it really easy, but I guess there's the different ones. So like in terms of classical, Bernini, I love Bernini's work. Ron Muick, who was the sculptor for Jim Henson, and then
Okay.
he went on to do his own work. I love his work, and I think he's one of the first people that I really started to like look at very seriously and think about process. I also, Beth Kavner, somebody was like, you sculpt rabbits, you like her work. And her work is stunningly beautiful, all
Okay.
fired
I have to
clay.
look
So
that one up. All right.
yeah, she's amazing.
I love to ask that question because I love to learn about new artists. I mean, for my sculpture is so limited in terms like I got Henry Moore and Tony
Mhm.
Cragg and sort of the big giants of it, but I love to learn about new artists. So I've got time for just one more question for you. It's
Okay.
been a pleasure talking with you, but one more question. It's a question I ask everybody. What does making art do for you?
I think it's a sort of a touchstone to my, life and sanity. I think if I didn't have that as an outlet, I definitely have to be doing something physical, kickboxing. But I guess it's also for me, it's a tool of communication. Like it's a way of connecting to other people and people saying to me like, hey, I feel that way, and I'm like, me too. I feel
Uh-huh.
that way. And so I think it's, I don't know, validation of my humanness, and just sort of like reaching out into the world and letting people know that they also, are
Mhm.
human and normal for feeling certain ways.
Don't be surprised for your birthday if you get a gift certificate to a kickboxing lesson. Because, just I can see that happen.
Darla needs to get out for
Right.
her.
Get that pressure out. I like that. Well, I can't thank you enough for talking to me today about you and your work. I really, really appreciate it. And I also want to thank everybody else who tuned in to watch Darla and I talk today. We love it when you're here to hear us talk and to, of course, like, share, and subscribe. That helps push us forward, makes us want to talk to more artists. So thank you very much for tuning in today. And again, Darla, thank you. It's been a pleasure today.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. Take care.